We're rolling. Right.
Okay.
We're rolling.
We're rolling. All right, ladies and gentlemen, I was asked to come up to Woodstock and to sit down and expose a lot of what we discovered here on AIB radio with the researchers that I have, with the talent that we have, and the people giving out knowledge. Everybody's dealing with foreclosures, child services, traffic tickets, criminal charges. Here with Paul and Joe, we're dealing with, dealing with marijuana and this kind of issues here. We need to get back to the foundation. So I wrote up here, and it's going to be on the board, some of the historical facts of what we're talking about. So let me get in and let me present this to you. The question is, how can we fix the problems such as foreclosures, traffic, child services, criminal cases, and corruption in the court system? Before you can address it, you first have to know the historical background that was put into place over the years that has created this problem. Ladies and gentlemen, this is something that was done overnight to the American people. This isn't something that just happened within the last 4, 5, 10, 15, 20 years. The history of this goes back as far back as the Revolutionary War, but I don't want to get into that far back of the history. If we got into the Civil War, where it separated this country, that was one of the major foundations that helped the issues and has created the problems that we're having. But let me get into a little more of what we have up here on the board before we get into that. But you need to know a little bit of the foundation here. This has been the best kept secret from the American people. It has turned the American people into human trafficking by the court system. Cash for bodies. The banking system, the court system, and the Bar Association has kept this hidden from the American people in order to enslave them and create human trafficking. Ladies and gentlemen, this goes back as far as, like I said, Civil War. The Civil War wasn't fought so much over slavery as much as what it was fought over banking and what Abraham Lincoln was trying to bring in. He was trying to bring back in the gold and silver. And we're going to get into some historical parts of that in Lindbergh's speech of 1917 and some of the comments that was made about greenbacks. But let's continue here. You have to know the historical side before you can fix a problem. You have to know where the problem starts and how it came about before you can fix it. How the people became aliens in the United States of America. Here is a timeline of history of it. This breaks it down as far back as 1867 up to the present date, to the bankruptcy and foreclosures of 2013. What we are about to talk about is laid out in historical records in the Library of Congress, and all information is validated through statutes at large, treaties, and records of Congress. I want to give recognition to the Library of Congress. Congress itself created the library to have all documents put into it, all historical records, all recordings of congressional hearings, the statutes at large, the treaties, everything that we have told, and all the things that we're going to talk about was all written by legislators. But who are the legislators? They're bar attorneys, majority of them. They are the bar people, the lawyers. They are the attorneys. These are the people that have created the laws, but yet these are the very same people that are breaking the laws. They come back in and they created the entire history of the statutes at large. Under Volume 15, Chapter 3, an act to provide for a more efficient government in the rebel states started on March 2nd, 1867. This is found in Volume 15 of the Statutes at Large, starting on page 428. The basis of this is where the federal government went into the South and overthrew the Southern government and forced them to take on the federal citizenship of the federal government. The northern states also had to come in compliance with this as well. This is where the 14th Amendment started. Getting back in to 1867. Ladies and gentlemen, this is where the issues really came in. This is the separation of federal citizen to that of state citizen. There's a lot of controversy on this. Everybody will come back and say, well, all of us are 14th Amendment citizens, and I will debate that, and I have debated it through different groups, because the 14th Amendment only applies to public officials. When that treaty was created, or when the North went into the South and they invaded, this was to take over their government. This was to force them out of their state sovereignty. This was to sit down and force them into federal citizenship. But you've got to remember something here. District of Columbia was not created yet. It has not been put in place yet. We have to sit down and understand that the federal government first had to take over the states. They had to take over the governments. They didn't take over the people. They took over the government. They took over the governor's office, the legislator's office, and the court system. They turned around, and once they took them over, they made them swear an oath to the federal government, but it wasn't the District of Columbia yet. Once they got the North and the South, both, that's where the 14th Amendment come in. If you read the 14th Amendment, and you read Section 2 and Section 3, it point blank tells you that it deals with public offices. It has nothing to do with the citizens of this country. Nothing at all. It has everything to do with judges, representatives. It has everything to do with governors and legislators on the state and on the federal side. It dealt with the military. It dealt with any civil service. It had nothing to do with the people. When they passed that 14th Amendment, these people had to swear an oath to the federal government. This was in 1868. 1867 is when they took over. 1868 is when they created the 14th Amendment. 14th Amendment is found in Statutes at Large, Volume 15. It starts on page 706 and on page 709. This was the beginning of the federal citizen compared to the national citizen. We're going to get more into that. Volume 16, Statutes at Large, an Act of 1871. This is what created the government of the District of Columbia. Remember, back at that time, the District of Columbia was two cities, the city of Washington and the city of Georgetown. It was two separate cities. Whenever they created the District of Columbia, they took a section out of both. And they did a survey plot. Now, this is the most important thing, and a lot of people are not aware of this. It's historical. The survey plot put 40 stones around that 10-mile square. On the inside of that stone, it says jurisdiction of the United States. On the outside, it says Maryland or Virginia. Now, stop and think about what we're saying here. Why, on a stone, why would they not put the District of Columbia and Maryland and Virginia on the back side? Why did they specifically say jurisdiction of the United States? Did that not separate the United States from the rest of the people? Because they sit here and showed that the states were separate The states were individuals compared to that of the United States itself. See, this is where we're running into an issue here of historical. This is why the historical side of this is so valuable. You really need to understand the history of what they've done. So now we walked in, we showed you where they took over the southern states and the northern states. They showed you where they put everything under the 14th Amendment, made you a federal citizen on their side. All the public offices, not the people, all the public offices. Then they created their own 10-mile government, created their own United States. That's the beginning of this. This is where it started. And they see, back at that time, they were still fighting with the banks. This is one of the major issues why Abraham Lincoln got killed, because he tried to come back in and fight the banking system. Let's jump up from 1867. Let's jump into 1913, Federal Reserve Act. Statute at Large, Volume 38, Chapter 6. An act to provide for the establishment of Federal Reserve banks to furnish an elastic currency to afford means of reduction commercial paper to establish a more efficient supervisory in banking in the United States and other purposes. Ladies and gentlemen, them last 4 words is in every legislative act from that time up to now, and for other purposes. They don't tell you what the other purposes are. When this was created, this created the Federal Reserve Notes. And the Federal Reserve Notes, under Section 16, it says Federal Reserve Notes is to be issued at the discretion of the Federal Reserve Bank boards for the purpose of making advancements to Federal Reserve banks through the Federal Reserve agents as herein set forth and for no other purposes are hereby authorized. Ladies and gentlemen, what does it mean no other purpose is authorized? What's it mean, Federal Reserve Notes? Federal Reserve Notes is that green piece of paper that you have in your pocket. It specifically tells you that it was for banking. Just to show you what we're talking about here, let me bring up a point here to prove that we're pulling everything out of the statute at large. There's the statute at large. March 1913 to March 1915. There's the volume. These are Congressional Records, ladies and gentlemen. These are the facts. These are the history. But we're going to go through here and we're going to get into more detail into all this. But I wanted to sit back and show you what we are talking is written by them. They wrote this. It wasn't you. It wasn't me. It was the system. Now we're going to go down to the Statute at Large, Volume 40, 1917. This dealt with the Trading with the Enemy Act. This goes back in where Germany started World War I, and the Federal Reserve was created in 1912, 1913. That's where they went into Germany, and they sat down and said, if you want to start a war, you're going to use our currency. We're going to back you. You want to trade, and same thing with the United States. Everything's going to have to go through the Federal Reserve System. This document was a very important document. Now look at the time frame. 1917, Trading with the Enemy Act. Whoever thought that they'd ever turn it and use it on the American people? But they have. Key points of this, it was done on October 6th, 1917. Remember these dates, because when we start getting into our own state of emergency, it will refer back to this time period. It will refer back to this Trading with the Enemy Act of 1917. Okay, on the sidebar of this, federal policy during the war. When the war World War I broke out in the mid-1914, U.S. banks continued to operate normally thanks to the emergency currency usage under the Art-Rich Veland Act of 1908. But the greater impact in the United States came from the Reserve Bank, ability to discount bankers' acceptance. Everybody wants to use acceptance for value. These are where the words are coming from. This is where the history is coming from. Through these mechanics, the United States added the flow of trade goods to Europe, indirectly helping to finance the war until 1917, when the United States officially declared war on Germany, and financing over its own war efforts became paramount. This too has been a very well kept secret for the American people. We were not aware. The people was not. Our system was. They knew what they were doing. When they set this up through the Federal Reserve, it was to finance the war. It was to sit down and force a new set of laws to come in against the American people. Coming up to the Statute at Large, Volume 48, 1933, to provide relief in the existing national emergency in banking and for other purposes. There's those words again. For other purposes. This starts on page 1 in Volume 48. Ladies and gentlemen, Title 1, Section 1 is where the regulations, licensing, and all the obligation came in to the American people. This is how they drug us into this. Right there, highlighted for you. Title 1, the action, regulations, rules, licenses, orders, proclamations, heretofore, hereafter taken, prolongated, made, or issued by the President of the United States or the Secretary of Treasury since March 4th, 1933, pursuant to the authority conferred by Subdivision B of Section 5 of the Act of October 6, 1917, as hereby amended. Remember me telling you to keep your memory on October 6, 1917, Trading with the Enemy Act? Here we are, 1933, from 1917, and they brought it right in on us. People will sit here and tell you that that act has been repealed. Ladies and gentlemen, they may have repealed the act, but they kept subsection B of Section 5 fully intact. Why? Because that allows the President to do a proclamation that we're under a state of emergency. We have a national crisis, and that allows them to come right back in and drag us right into the Federal Reserve note of 1913 of issuing phony currency to you and I. We're going to get into more of that. Right now, this is just a preview of future shows and future editings that's going to come in. We're just trying to bring you up to speed a little bit. We're just trying to show you a little bit about what's coming out and what's happening. You need to know the fraud. We're going to come up now to 1935. Statute at Large, Volume 49. On to page 620. Get on to Section 501, 502. It shows, starting in 1936, when we were born, the Social Security Act came in 1935, but it kicked in 1936. Every child born from that time on, through the Department of Labor, Department of Labor and Department of Commerce, you had a $1.8 million price tag put on you the moment you were born. The states, through the fiscal year, got approximately $1 million per year per child. Now, what does that mean? Ladies and gentlemen, I'm 59 years old. That means from the time I was born till now, the state has made $59 million off of me. Well, that's just you. Ohio has 8 million people. North Carolina has roughly 8-9 million people. New York City has roughly 10 million people? 10 million people just in New York City? New York City, $1 million per person, per year, per age. Think about the amount of money. This is where the issue's coming in. I need to understand the Federal Reserve Act. You need to understand the bankruptcy. And now we're talking the Social Security Act of 1935. Let's go to the Alien Registration Act of 1940. The Alien Registration Act of 1940. Let me pull it up here a minute. Yeah, Volume 50, Statute at Large, 1940. Alien Registration Act. This is what created the birth certificates. This is the proof of the live birth. This is the footprint. This also had a twofold effect. And what do I mean by that? It also created what was known as the Smith Act. What it was when it was created is that whoever was an alien cannot advocate the overthrow of the United States government. They cannot advocate chaos within this country, to where it's disrespect for the very statutes and rules and regulations and laws that was created. Now, again, let's go back in. Who created this stuff? The Bar Association. The lawyers did. The judges were part of this. The very people that we're having problems with. That Smith Act, if you go back and read it and understand it, and we'll pull it up here. Like I said, right now we're just giving you a preview of what all we're going to get into. This is the mainstream of hitting highlights for all of you. If you go back into the Bar Association, get in under Title 36, United States Code. Once you get into Title 36, United States Code, of all the places to sit here and find it, Title 36 falls under Patriot and National Observatory and Cemetery and organizations. Get into subtitle Patriot and National Observance and Ceremonies. The reason why we're doing this, I'm walking you through all this, ladies and gentlemen. I want you to sit here. I want you to watch what we're clicking, what we're hitting. Because I want you to sit here and see for yourself what we're talking about. All right. Federal Prisoners Cleanup Day. All right. They sit here and they changed it. Let me come back in. Let me do it this way with you. Let me show you something here. When Title 36. Title 36, USC, Section 705. Some of this stuff they remove out of the books. Why? Because they don't want you finding it. But you have to do a little bit of looking, do a little bit of research. Title 36, USC, Chapter 705, the foundation of the Federal Bar Association. Now, under the Smith Act, they cannot advocate the overthrow of a government. They cannot refuse to uphold. Look under Section C, grounds for disqualification. Any individual may not be a member, director, or officer of the corporation if the individual is a member of an advocate, the principal of the organization believing in or working for the overthrow of the United States government by force or violence, or refusing to uphold and defend the Constitution of the United States. Ladies and gentlemen, this is not Rod Class saying this to you. I just pulled it up out of their statutes. I just pulled it up out of their rules, out of their regulations. Remember, the Bar Association created this. It wasn't we the people. This, and we will get into it, the Bar Association, ladies and gentlemen, under the 81st Congress, 1953, National Lawyer Guild is a true communist party. And we have the Congressional Records to back it up. But I want to sit here and show you what you're walking into. Remember, this is the Federal Bar Association. Federal Bar Association. I want to bring up, I also want to sit back and show you one thing here that's very significant. We're running a little bit slow here. Let me bring it up.
We can edit it.
Okay. But I want to show you that the Federal Bar Association is a corporation to the United States. Corporation to the United States. 70501. But everything we're producing, ladies and gentlemen, is found in their books. Everything is found in their books. This is why the judges and the lawyers hate us. Because we're going back to their rule books. We're going back to their foundation. It says Federal Charter, the foundation of the Federal Bar Association. In this chapter, the corporation is a federally chartered corporation. You know what's funny? If you look up the Federal Bar Association, you get into the websites, they'll sit here and show you that they're a 501c religious organization. Now, whoever sit here would thought that they're sitting here coming under a 501c nonprofit organization as a religious organization. In their own charter, I just showed you, they cannot advocate the overthrow of the United States Constitution. They cannot advocate the overthrow of the government. Also goes in their charter, it sits here and shows, ladies and gentlemen, they cannot represent John Q. Public. They can't represent us. They're a corporation. They can only represent the government. But yet when we walk into that courtroom, you got a judge sitting on the bar, sitting on the bench, which is sitting on the bar. He is a bar member. You got the prosecutor. He's a bar member. You got an attorney. Is a bar member. You are the only non-bar member in that courtroom. How are they representing us when we're not part of the system? They are running a monopoly. That monopoly is in violation of the Sherman Antitrust Act and the Clayton Antitrust Act. This goes in and violates the Smith Act. They're advocating the overthrow. But see, we was never taught any of this. Through AIB radio on TalkShoe, through the researchers that I have, such as Jeanette out there in Oregon, Corey out there in Oregon. I have Harvey up here in New Hampshire. I've got people all over the United States and the listeners that are dumping information into me for what we're bringing out. We are exposing this stuff. One of our listeners sent me this Title 36. But as you can see, they sit here and sort of hide things. That's why you got to get the hard copies. But they sort of hide some of this stuff out on the internet so we can't find it because we don't want us using it. We've got into the state statutes on the Bar Association. North Carolina, under Chapter 84, it deals with the Bar Association. It is an agency to the state. Same guidelines. They are an agency. They can only represent agencies, public officials. There's no place that allows them to represent John Q. Public. This is why, under that Corpus Juris Secundum, that Volume 7, Section 2 and 4, 2 gets into they can only represent wards, incompetent, and minors. Section 4, their first obligation is to the court. Their first obligation is to their public officials, to their public office, to their political subdivisions. They have no obligation to John Q. Public whatsoever. Why? Because we're not part of the administration. We're not part of the corporation. This is why they want you to hire one of them in order for them to have control. Because once you hire one of them, then you agree to their guidelines. When we walk in and refuse, it upsets the apple cart. Ladies and gentlemen, it comes into education. That's what these videos are going to be about. Education. It's going to be about knowledge, about understanding. Let me get back down into what we were talking about. But I wanted to sit here and show you people all of our information comes from their books. It isn't something that we're pulling out. I had an attorney sit back and tell one of the people that I'm working with, oh, that's that militia propaganda. That's that patriot propaganda. Ladies and gentlemen, if USC codes is militia and the statutes at large is militia and it's patriot propaganda, it came from your communistic side. Because remember, you guys belong to the National Lawyers Guild and they admitted in 1953 that you're a communist party. You're the ones that's advocating the overthrow of our Constitution in these courtrooms. You're the ones who's advocating that the federal laws and the state laws are frivolous, unintelligible, uncomprehendable. Well, you're absolutely right because you're the ones that wrote them. Because they're vague for awareness. You come back in and you leave loopholes within them. But yet you want us to be held accountable to a set of rules and regulations that you yourself created. Let me get down into the International Organization Immunities Act of 1945. Ladies and gentlemen, in 1933, when they did that state of emergency, they stripped us of our gold, they stripped us of our silver. In 1933, under 49 Stat 3097, Treaty Series 881, Conventions and Duties and Rights of the States, I don't have that up on here, but it's something I left off. They placed us under international law. 1945, Volume 59, Statute at Large, International Organization Immunities Act of 1945, starts on page 669. United States Congress placed every public office under UN jurisdiction. Now stop and think what we're saying here. 1867, the federal government came into the South and pulled all the public officials out of their national citizenship and put them under federal citizenship. Not only in the South, but in the North. 1945, they took these very same offices and put them under UN control. These are UN offices. Now, some of you are going to sit back and say, well, how do you know that? I want you to sit back and think, those who watch the news, here about 2 years ago, whenever Arizona created their immigration law, who did Hillary Clinton go to? Was it Congress or was it the UN? She went into the UN under the International Organization of Immunities Act to claim subject matter jurisdiction over the governor of Arizona, over the legislators in Arizona, all the way down to the sheriff in Arizona. She brought UN charges. Now think about what we're sitting here saying. These people are foreigners that are under UN. I want to go back and I want to talk to you a little bit about their oath of office. Under their oath, it comes under foreign relations, under 92.12 to 92.30. The key issue here comes under Title 22 CFR, foreign relation. Why is their oath under foreign relations? Under Title 8 USC Code 1481, it shows that they come under alien and nationals. Under Title 8 1481, it is a requirement for them to have relinquished their national citizenship. National citizenship. Well, if they're not American nationals, then that makes them federal citizens. Again, here's the two separations. Federal citizens to national. Two separations. This falls back under that 1917 Trading with the Enemy Act. When they brought it up to 1933, that's where they made us enemies of the state. Ladies and gentlemen, this has been a long history of what they've done to us, how they've done it to us. This wasn't done overnight. They put things in places. They put things in order to sit down, to swindle the people. It's all done behind closed doors. Now, the question is, now to address the problem. In the foreclosures, here's a brief history of the banking. If you understand the Federal Reserve, you understand the state of emergency, you understand the Social Security Act, and you understand the alien registration, these four, if you understand these four, this explains the entire fraud, because that Federal Reserve Act created Federal Reserve notes, to which was internal currency. It was strictly internal for the banking system. Then they created the Federal Reserve, they created the state of emergency, which stripped you of your gold and of your silver, knowing full well that they had a currency that was never supposed to be ever given to the people. McFadden sat here and says in 1933 that the Federal Reserve note is not money. It's in Congressional Records. He sits here, Lindbergh brought up, the credit is the people of the United States. Ladies and gentlemen, you and I, we're the credit line. Not the gold, not the silver, not the oil, not the copper, not the natural resources of this country. Which brings us into a very important thing here, what people were not aware of. Those who deal with guardian ad litems, you know where they're found? In Title 25, Code of Federal Regulations, which is Indian Affairs, which is the Department of Interior. And if you look up the Department of Interior, it says resources. You will find that guardian ad litem that controls all the children. And I just sit here and we're going to show you in the next several segments, under the statutes at large, under the Social Security Act, that people are put under Secretary of Labor, which falls under Secretary of Commerce. A lot of us knew that our birth certificates went to the commerce side of this thing. That's because we are part of the natural resources. This was a lot of things that people did not realize. But this is the history that we're up underneath. This is what these people have done to us. This is how they have done it to us. So we are put under Department of Interior as a resource for this country. They're not using gold. They're not using silver. They're not using the lumber. They're not using the coal. They're embezzling this. Any other country, such as Kuwait, Libya was until they took Gaddafi out. Libya was sitting here using their natural resource to help furnish the people's homes and pay for the medical bills. They was contributing to it through the natural resources. Kuwait, none of their citizens work. Why? Because they get a kickback off the natural resources. They hire foreigners to come in and run their shops. This country is one of the wealthiest countries in the entire world because of what we have here. We've got gold, we got coal, we got oil, but yet not one dime is being used towards the paying the public debt. And is there really a public debt? Is there really a public debt in this country? What are they doing with the natural resources? Who's pocketing this? The bottom line boils down to, ladies and gentlemen, you and I have been put into human trafficking. The Social Security Act, like I brought up, shows that the state gets every fiscal year approximately $1 million per live birth all the way up. Like I said, I'm 59 years old. They've collected $59 million off me. And they're supposed to be paying our bills. This goes right back into acceptance. But see, we have a problem here. And this is what a lot of people don't understand. You get people going to jail in this country because they're trying to use that credit line. You cannot use that credit line on our behalf. We haven't figured out how to properly use it yet. But the example that I give to people is this. Let's sit here and say that you, the parent, set a trust up for your child. You're the executor, you're the administrator, you're the trustee, whatever name you want to give yourself, but you control that trust. Can a child turn around after they turn 18 and write a check off that trust? No. If they do, that signature is a forgery. That's why people are going to jail in this country, because they're trying to sit here and write bonds. They're trying to write promissory notes. The promissory note's already been written once. Getting into that Federal Reserve Act, that 1913, that we just briefly showed you, it's the obligation of the United States. The moment you sign that note, the moment your name goes across there, and this is going to be proven because we're going to get into McFadden's speech. The moment you sign that bill should have went to the Treasury, and it should have been discharged. But what they're doing is they're sending it off to the Federal Reserve so they can cash it in, because in that state of emergency, it shows that you're only getting 10%. They got another 90% that they could turn around and make off of what you wrote. So what that means is if you have a check for $100,000, that's only 10%. What's the other 90%? That comes up to $1 million that they're sitting here, they're embezzling. None of this is going towards the public debt, not one single dime. You and I are being sold. Like I said, it's cash for bodies. It's human trafficking. Lindbergh got into this in 1917 when he sat here and told us that it is the people that is the credit line. McFadden in 1932 got in and started explaining that Federal Reserve note is 100% on the dollar. It was supposed to show that it was to represent a mortgage. key word, represent a mortgage on all homes, all property. It was never supposed to have been a mortgage. It was supposed to have the appearance because you signed a note, you take it to the Treasury, you cash it. That's why all your property is in the state's name. Your deed is in the county's name. Your automobile is in the state's name. And I got into this debate with 2 sheriff departments down here in North Carolina. I talked to them about the MSO, the Manufacturer Statement of Origin. I very plainly sit down and said, do you understand what the Manufacturer Statement of Origin is? They said, yes, we do. I said, what is that? That's the ownership of the vehicle. I talked to the finance company. They called it the birth certificate of the automobile. It gets turned over to the state. They securitize off of it. So if it belongs to the state and it's registered to the state, then who owns that automobile? You and I are only listed as a designated driver. We're not the owners. The state owns it. So to make this very simple, I asked the sheriff, I said, let me ask you a stupid question here. Who owns these cruisers for the sheriff department? He says, the county does. I said, the county? He says, yep, county owns it. I said, well, if the county owns it, then you guys as drivers put your own gas in it, right? He says, no, we got a debit card that we take in, we run it through, the county pays for the gas. I said, you guys pay for your own insurance, right? He says, no, the county pays for the insurance. I said, did you sit down and you guys have to do your own maintenance, right? He says, no, we got a department that does their own maintenance. So what it comes down to, ladies and gentlemen, is any state vehicle that's registered to the state, federal government, or to the county or political subdivision, like the little police cruisers, these entities foot the bill. They pay the insurance, they do the maintenance, they pay for the gas, they do all the upkeep. Now I ask one simple question here. You guys don't get a paycheck, do you? He said, well, yeah, we get paid. I said, well, that's funny. I haven't been paid. I said, so what you're telling me is the state owns my car. Yes, they do. Then the state should be paying insurance on it. The state should be paying gas for it, maintenance. Then I should be collecting a paycheck. And I'm not collecting any of this. This falls back under that state of emergency clause. This falls back under that Federal Reserve Act of 1913. They created a note that we're not allowed to have. They took our means of being able to pay for anything, and everything was turned over to them. Everything was turned over to them. So if everything was turned over, then they are accountable for it. You wonder why you have to have a driver's license. Now, that's something else we're going to get into, driver's license issue. Ladies and gentlemen, there's only 2 types of driver's licenses. A CDL, commercial driver's license, which is for semi-truck, for 26,001 pound and up, and a commercial motor vehicle for 10,001 pound and up. Now, you notice I'm using the word up. I'm not using the word down. Up. So anything that weighs over 10,001 pounds, you have to have a commercial driver's license for. Anything that runs over 26,001 pounds, you got to have a CDL license for. How many motorcycles weigh out at 10,001 pounds? How many VWs weigh out at 10,001 pounds? How many Jeeps, cars, pickup trucks? Even the biggest pickup truck don't weigh out no 10,000 pounds. You and I have been suckered. You and I have been scammed, and we have been conned to the worst extent. Now, again, all this is in their statutes. All this is in their regulations. If you get into Title 49, USC Code, get into registration and licenses, get into Title 49, CFR, get into licenses. It sits down and breaks all this stuff down. Ladies and gentlemen, this isn't me telling you this. All this stuff is found in the books that the lawyers and the judges and the Bar Association has created. They cannot walk into a courtroom. They cannot walk into a courtroom and sit here and say, well, this is frivolous, this is unintelligible, we don't comprehend when they wrote the book. If anybody is incompetent, it is the lawyer that's walking into that courtroom. The bottom line boils down to, with what we've seen here and showed you, they are part of the Bar Association. If the judge is going to tell you have to hire a lawyer because he's knowledgeable in the law and he knows the law, then why doesn't he know his own rules and regulations? Why doesn't he know about the Federal Reserve Act 1913? Why doesn't he know that that Federal Reserve note is a worthless piece of paper and that it has no value? Why isn't he aware the fact that whenever that note was created, the Federal Reserve created a monopoly? And don't we have laws in this country about running a monopoly? Aren't they trying to break up the telephone system because one system's bigger than another one? And they're trying to control, so we have to split you up because you got a monopoly going here? Wasn't they doing this with Microsoft, trying to split it up and break it down? How many other businesses? Why aren't they doing the same thing with the Bar Association? Why are they not doing the same thing with the Federal Reserve? Again, this is one of the best kept secrets. This is why the courts do not like people like me walking into the courtroom. That's why they don't like people like us walking in who are educated and bringing in their own rules, bringing in their own guidelines, bringing in their own regulations, and sitting here saying, you created this stuff. When you hand them the documentation, the first thing they want to do is go silent on you and drop their head and nod either yes or no, either you're right or you're wrong, but they'll never put it on a record. This is part of the problem, and it's going to take the people. Across this nation, there is a group of people that's trying to restore the republic. They're trying to sit down and bring in a proper form of government into this country. Ladies and gentlemen, in order for you to be able to bring in and be able to have a proper form of government, we ourselves have to know the historical side. We have to know what they did, when they did, and how they did it to us. We have to know how to be able to come back in and fix the problem. Everybody out here, ladies and gentlemen, is looking for that silver bullet. But let me explain something to you. That silver bullet that everybody's looking for, have you ever stopped to think what a silver bullet is made of? It's got 4 components. It's got a cap, it's got a cartridge, it's got powder, and it's got the tip. You got 4 components to a silver bullet. It isn't a thing by itself. It's got 4 parts, and that's exactly what we're talking about. And that doesn't include the mechanism or the arm that you got to put it in and use it, because now you're talking about the barrel, now you're talking about the cylinder, now you're talking about the hammer, now you're talking about the trigger, now you're talking about the spring, you're talking about the grip. There's no such thing as a silver bullet. That silver bullet you're talking about is the pieces of the historical side that has come about. It is about putting the pieces together to show where they committed the fraud, how they committed the fraud, over the period of years that they have done this. It's our ability to be able to walk into these courts and stand up as Americans, not as militia, not as a patriot, but as Americans coming into these courts and telling these courts we want accountability. This is where you file in your declaratory judgment and you ask that judge to define the statutes at large, define the USC codes, define your state statutes, your state administrative codes. Because he has to sit down and be able to define all this. And if he can't, then you're set up in a position to where They have no authority to drag you in, and they don't have it anyhow. Because number one, you have no injured victim. You have no property damage. You have not endangered the public on any of this. It is strictly a cash flow through your birth certificate through the commerce side, because when you were born into the Secretary of Labor through the Secretary of Commerce. You was born into commerce. And we've never been told, and it's never been explained, and it's never been validated, because the moment you try to bring this stuff up, they sit here and want to run you off as some type of psycho, and they want to have the little guys in the white jackets come in and haul you out. But yet, the Congressional Records is there in their face, and they can never admit it, because the moment they do, they have to admit to the fraud, they have to admit to the embezzling and to the swindling of the American people, of what they've done to us, how they've done it to us. And ladies and gentlemen, we need to restore the republic, but those who are stepping up, you better learn the job of the governors, the legislators, and all the departments in the same manner that I have taught myself to be a private attorney general, by reading the laws, understanding the laws, and using it under 14th Amendment, Section 4, as a 14th Amendment bounty hunter. That means, under the Act of Congress, under bounty hunting laws, it allows us to walk in and do a Title 42, 1983 Civil Rights, and a Title 18, 241, 242 to go after these people under color of law. Our problem is right now we don't have the enforcement. Why? Because the people are not educated. And that's what these videos are going to be about, education, in order to sit down and bring you up to speed.